What's up, guys? This is Pete, Carrot Clark, and a happy new year. Happy 2018 to everyone. The Carrot Poker Podcast is finally out of its winter hibernation, even though it's kind of still winter here, and we're back for an exclusive interview today with one of my students. I've got Chris with me. How's it going, man?
Hey, it's going great, Pete.
Good to have you on the show. So, Chris, for me, you is one of my most interesting students in the farm that I get a lot of people all the time who have been away from the game and they come back and they're like, I want to hire a coach to find out what I missed. Now, the thing that I found interesting about you was that those guys normally start off at like 5 cent, 10 cent, and not like 10, 20 or whatnot. So let's get a little bit of background. So pre-Black Friday, what were you doing in poker? What kind of games were you playing?
Yeah, well, before I took a break from the game, I played for about 4 years, basically like 2004 to 2008. I mean, that's close to the heyday, really, I feel like. And I lived in Vegas during that time. And for the bulk of it, my main game was probably like 10-20 No Limit Live. Mm-hmm. And of course, playing quite a bit online too, in a bunch of different varieties. But that's a feel for about where I was as a professional. I was out of it, by the time that Black Friday hit, which was kind of nice. I didn't get funds locked up or whatever. Although I don't know, some of your listeners may remember like a net teller debacle where they had funds locked up in 2003 or something like that. So I lived through that one and kept lower balances on my online site after that. So that's kind of like my pre Black Friday.
Yeah, cool.
Play.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because we have like the bubonic plague, and then we have like the Crusades and all these terrible things that happened in life. And in poker, it's like, the net teller debacle or like Black Friday or whatever, and it's like they're like Armageddon or something like that. It always kind of amuses me.
Exactly.
But it kind of is when it's your job. Like, I would sure as hell hate it if they like banned
No, having been out of the game, it was having already kind of moved on, it was a relief to not be stuck having to make the decision that I'm sure a lot of other pros did. Yeah. For me, it just cut back on like my recreational play, which was fine. Okay. I can replicate that with trips to the casino.
So you were a professional poker player throughout that time, and you were making presumably fairly decent money playing poker. So if it wasn't Black Friday, what made you want to sort of change direction then pre-Black Friday?
Yeah, well, I think that even though times were really good, being like a mid-stakes pro kind of has a income cap, I feel like, of what you can expect in any given year. And it certainly wasn't a bad living at the time, but I guess it kind of became, well, here's a really specific example. It wasn't very risky for me to leave poker when I did. I was going to keep my skill set, and there's no job interview to get back in. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it was very low risk for me to kind of, I hadn't finished my college degree at that point. So it was very low risk to kind of jump back into there, finish my college degree, see what jobs are out there, see if the real world is really as terrible as I thought it was when I started playing poker. And, if it was, I could jump right back into poker. And if it wasn't terrible, then fine, that would work out too.
And here's a question. I'm terrified of the real world, so was it?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. And I mean, boy, you've got all sorts of people who've experienced the rates at which poker money can either come in or go out of your account. It's much less stressful to live on a paycheck. You do have to deal with your boss's crap, I guess, but none of this is really new. And obviously I kind of stayed out of the game, and I don't have aspirations to go pro again at this point. So I guess that kind of answers the question for you.
Yeah, I think I'll still hide in the cocoon of the poker world anyway, because it's nice and warm in here and I don't have to leave my house or my pajamas. So
fair enough.
Good to know that the outside world isn't quite as demonic as I certainly think it is. I guess I worked a lot of rubbish jobs before I made decent money from the poker world, and therefore I don't really have anything to leave poker for at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real fair point, Pete. I mean, I can say quite frankly that, like leaving poker, going back, finishing up to school, and the job I'm in now, I'm exceeding the earnings that I had as a mid-stakes pro, right? If I really thought that my opportunity to make a living was much better in poker, I might look at it quite a bit differently too.
Definitely, yeah. I think for a lot of people as well, I don't know what you think about this, having been there and done both sides of it, but a lot of people are doing quite well in the real world and have this idea that being a poker pro gives you this kind of newfound freedom. No one's your boss. You can do whatever you want. You feel like you're suddenly alive and the king of the world. Is that the case in reality? I mean, I've got my own opinion on it, but what's yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a big factor in influencing when I left the game the first time. I always like to say that, like, when I first started playing professionally in like 2004, I got better every single year, you know, because as a pro, you're going to work on your game, you're going to think about things, you're going to get better at analyzing your opponent's holdings and situations, whatever it is. But I really felt like over that 4-year period, my edge over the field diminished every year as well. You know, it's kind of like if I played Tiger Woods in golf or something. I don't play golf right now, so I am absolutely positive I could shave like 15 strokes off of my handicap to him. You know, and I really felt like during that time where poker was in such a boom, some decent material was published and good online forums, and just the accessibility of information allowed the field to really catch up on me even back then, you know? And so the whole tie in there is that poker does become more of a job where you need to put your hours in to make the money, you know? When I got into it, I thought there'd be a lot of freedom too. As a pro in Las Vegas, you end up working like Friday and Saturday night, right? Like that's prime time. That's not exactly, depending on your world point of view, the definition of like complete freedom to do whatever you want, right? I'd have friends come into town and like they want to go clubbing or whatever on Friday or Saturday night in Vegas, and I'd be like, guys, that's really expensive for me. I gotta go sit in that room and play some cards or something. So there are elements of being able to choose what you want to do, and certainly I could take a Friday or Saturday off, but your yearly result, like you've got to put in the hours or you're not going to make the money. And that's when the realism kind of kicks in, I feel like, as a poker pro.
Totally. I was actually streaming earlier and, you know, I was taking questions on this stream and someone asked me something to the effect of, why do you not play poker full time? Like, could you not do better playing poker full time than all this coaching and writing and stuff like that? And I was like, honestly, maybe. But what kind of hours would I have to invest both studying? Studying doesn't pay shit when you play poker, you know? Like, studying, it does in a roundabout way, but no one's subsidizing you for all those hours you've got to spend looking at ranges and working with Pio these days and designing all these things to be right at the top of the game. So honestly, I think that poker is a great gateway for some people as well, and that they can actually write a book, they can create material, and then they can sit and watch people buy it slowly without having to do anything. So that was really big for me. I kind of saw poker as, like, I love the game, but maybe it's just a gateway to like showcase other talents as well, and that's what I really like about it. So for me, I'm totally on board with what you said, that idea of being forced to put in all these hours at all these terrible times when you'd rather not be. I mean, I guess that put me off as well, but if we crush everyone's dream of being a pro, then, you know, it won't be a good thing for the industry. So what were the positive times when you were doing it professionally? What were the best elements of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, being a poker pro and even an amateur who like has the dreams of qualifying into various events and going on trips to, you know, exotic locations like islands and playing some 5 or 10K tournament or something like that. I had the opportunity to do a few of those where I either qualified or bought in or whatever. And, you know, that's a significant perk that my current employer never says like, next week we're going to just move the office to somewhere warm and we'll just work from there or something, you know.
That's cool.
So that sort of stuff was really beneficial. And as much as I slammed, like, you don't get every weekend off or something, there were a couple of times where, like, I had a college buddy who was traveling around Europe and he invites me along and I'm like, sure, I'll go for 3 weeks, you know, and then just kind of forget about poker during that time and come right back to it. So the people who envision an increase in freedom in their daily lives, it is there. You just also have to have some self-discipline to make sure it doesn't get carried out of hand.
Absolutely, or you make nothing at the end of the year. Like, I've been there loads of times, and I think that's something that I think it actually breeds like virtue in a person to be self-employed, whether it's poker or whether it's like teaching or whatever it is that they're doing. You kind of develop this skill of being your own guardian, of looking out for yourself. So there's almost two versions of yourself. There's the one that's allowed off the leash, and then there's the one holding the leash, right? That's like, actually, that's enough roaming now, you come back. And I really like that about turning pro and then eventually like being an author and things like that, is that no one else is going to do the work for you, and you have to develop that relationship with yourself almost. And I think that's a really interesting thing that poker's taught me. If I had to put it on my CV, I'd be like, I can make myself do stuff now I couldn't before I did this gig, you know? That's a pretty
Yeah, I think that there are some real relevant life lessons that you can learn through your own play and results and your own kind of assessment of what you've done in the past. I mean, like, regardless of your viewers' take on how hard the game is right now, the only thing I know is that it'll be harder in a year, and then harder in 3 years after that, and so on and so forth. When I started playing, there's no doubt the games were just so soft that I approached it. And I was a young kid when I started playing too. So, like, if I could play Thursday night and make enough money to have fun during the weekend and cover my portion of the rent I was looking to do at that particular week or whatever, I'd call it quits after that, you know, and just kind of make what I needed to maintain my life at that exact moment. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know, but looking back, even when I was leaving poker, you know, and I felt like the game had gotten so much harder in 2008 than it was in 2004, there was this sense of, if I could go back to 2004, I swear I would play 24/7, 365, and just bank so much money, and then I would take all the time off or something. Now, obviously, that's not realistic, but you do start just weighing those different options in your life and how you're going to split up your time.
Yeah, I think if I could go back to 2008 right now and play full time, I would absolutely want to do that as well. It's just so relative. Even 2011, you know, like, it's just crazy how quickly the game actually evolves. So I guess that's like the next part of what I want to talk to you about a little bit today is, well, you contacted me. It was pretty much right when you decided to come back and start playing a little bit more in your free time again, right? You started to re-enter the poker world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I only really left poker kind of when I went back to school. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do too much then and kind of get what I wanted out of the education system, having kind of like failed with balancing education versus poker previously, right?
Yeah.
And then even shortly after that, when I was just working and had some kind of disposable income and free time, I'd still play occasionally. Online was not very available, but I would go play 2-5 or 5-10 no limit at a casino if 5-10 was even spread, or really try to make it out to the World Series at least every other year and play in some sort of event, whether it's the main event or something smaller or whatever I felt like I could do. And I would say that I didn't contact you at first, or any coach, in like I don't know, what is this, 2012 to 2015 type time frame, because I was still holding my own with kind of my old strategy, which of course like reflects a 2008 kind of mindset or something, but I wasn't playing in particularly tough games either, right? Like a 2-5 no limit live game, not particularly tough here, and a World Series event kind of early on, still softer fields, so I felt pretty comfortable about my game, knowing that I wasn't working hard on it anymore, but my instincts were still good and I was getting decent results. I mean, I wasn't trying to make a living, so it was fine to kind of scratch or do a little better than that.
Sure.
Starting maybe last year or 18 months ago or a little further, I just noticed what I felt like was a real step up in play, even in an event I thought was going to be soft, like the main event at the World Series. Where all my years of poker training, like, didn't suggest to me what I should be doing to adjust to the play I was seeing, but I was able to recognize very quickly that, like, I had shifted into a bigger underdog role, and just like the competitive side of me plus the edge-seeking side of having been a former pro, it kind of woke up and said, like, well, if I still want to keep this as a serious hobby, I've got to get back to doing some study. It's not enough to just kind of like wing it and sharpen up my old style and see what happens. I'm feeling like a bigger dog here.
Cool. And so what surprised me, obviously, is that, well, first of all, I don't normally coach. Most people I coach are aspiring to be professionals. They've never been professionals, let alone for like 6 years or whatever, like yourself. So, like, right away when I take on someone who is a pro, it's exciting for me, or who has been a pro or whatever, because I'm like, okay, this is someone that's going to have a very good grasp of the foundations, which indeed you definitely did. And then when we started working together, you were like, I'll just dip into this 200 NL Zoom kind of style game, which is considered, like, on Stars mainstream pretty tough, less so on Bovada, obviously, where you were playing. But then you were very quickly up at 510, 1020, and even 2550. So maybe it would be really cool, actually, for people to hear what your experiences were, given that you just started really working hard on your game again, albeit you'd still been in poker to some extent. You just really started working hard again. You'd started getting up to date with the modern theory. How were games such as, let's say, 510 or 1020 on Bovada to you? Like, how tough did you find them when you jumped back in after the first stages of coaching?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's a good question. I guess just like to try and summarize really quickly where I used to be at the end of like my 2008 playing days. You probably remember Daniel Negreanu's small ball nonsense or whatever.
Yeah.
I liked employing that quite a bit, and felt like I could employ some sort of strategy like that against very aggressive players effectively. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a trappy check call-y type thing. Keep your ranges pretty strong, and if they get over aggressive, you're just going to like catch them and beat them, right?
Yeah.
Then I also had a style of play to take advantage of anybody who I found to be weaker and too passive, where I can be very aggressive and I can kind of run those guys over, you know? So those were kind of like the two modes I would be shifting between depending on who I felt like I was playing against and in the exact table dynamics.
Yeah.
So when you talk about like 200 no limit Zoom on Bovada, when I jumped back into that, I really still felt like I could run over the majority of the pool. So switching into pretty aggressive style of play, relying on my opponents to not be very good at constructing their ranges, aka by the turn I can put them on something that's accurate and not very well balanced, and I can just exploit whatever I should do against that, whether it's just over bluffing them out or checking because they're only going to arrive here with a monster. You know, I can just like make some really good exploitative plays because I can still get them into these imbalanced ranges with high accuracy, I guess. Yeah. So that was still working at like, at least here in the States on a relatively soft site, the Bovada 200 no limit Zoom. By the time I get into like 510 and 1020, I usually felt like the players tightened up a decent amount. And I guess that's just specifically like the nonsense of open limping at 6 max and then calling up and other just like terrible plays like that, you know? And then against, there's a large percentage who I don't think are very, and maybe 10-20. And that just means that they still stay a little too tight when they enter the pot to begin with. So I can either kind of overfold a little bit pre-flop, or if they're just calling me out of the blinds, I can exert some pressure and still kind of bully them around a little bit because they give up a little too fast, I think. So to be honest, I didn't find those stakes too difficult. I certainly felt my edges were much lower than 200 no limit Zoom, where I'm just observing like what I consider to be very fundamentally bad plays. Yeah. And what was most interesting to me was perhaps switching over to like ACR, America's Card Room, which is whatever, WPN skin, I think. Yeah. I had already heard that those games were probably going to be tougher. I believed that because they allow HUDs and other things that professionals just are going to like, you know. Yeah. Bovada doesn't allow that, so some pros are going to choose not to play there even though the games are softer. By the time I switched over there, like 5-10 and up, and I mean, I mostly played 25-50 over there, but these are games that have people executing the strategy you're teaching to me in lessons and executing it well, and they've clearly like internalized it. And I was just surprised how effective it is against everything I used to try to do. You know what I mean? That's where I really started to feel like an underdog in the game. And it was kind of fascinating because hopefully while an underdog, I wasn't hemorrhaging money. And it's sometimes the fastest way to learn is to see somebody execute the strategy against you and then review it in lessons, think about it yourself, and then try to, employ that right back at them the next time you go at it at the table. So that part for me was really exciting and fun because it was finally a limit where I was pushed beyond my comfort zone for sure, and it was difficult to figure out. I mean, I've got to tip my hat to all the guys who are playing levels like that and playing the game that way, because it's a much, much more sophisticated and better strategy than what I used to do as a professional.
Yeah, I think it's funny because like back in the day, what was standard was highly unbalanced. It's just that for some reason we had this mental block as a community where we couldn't step out of the rigid box and see that we were just 3-betting so polar that our range was just full of utter crap on X board texture or whatever. Whereas these days, we have a fundamental start point. So I guess like when you take the old strategy that works well and you move up to these games and suddenly within not too long they've adjusted to it, they were starting out from some like really solid base point and then just going from there. It's almost like being invincible until you know what to do. And that's the scary thing I think about modern poker, that guys are so theoretically sound that there's just no way you can even entice them into that war of exploitability. I remember watching like early exploitative stuff, like Beluga Whale and things like that back in the day, and it was very much like, I'll start by limping on the button to make you think I'm this kind of player, and then I'll do this and hit you with this curveball, and it used to work really well. But now people are just like, I'll just stay in my fortress of GTO. Now I see what you're actually doing. I'll come out and crush you when I'm ready. And that's the terrifying part, I think, definitely for anyone that's been away, and kind of, it's fair to say that the time you were away from the game was probably when the GTO revolution was happening. So by the time you re-immersed yourself in the study, it had happened, and suddenly it was all restructured, and the way that you had to think about everything was like completely different. Because I remember being blown away by it, and I was even studying the game at that point. So for you, I remember thinking, this must be like stepping out of like an underground bomb shelter after like a huge nuclear holocaust, and then there's like deformities all over the world kind of thing.
Feel that way. Yeah. Just this total change in how you would even approach the problem of how to play a poker hand. Like when I quit as a pro, I've got to admit that a lot of times after getting dealt into a hand, what are my thoughts? Like, where's my position? What's my stack size? What sort of opponents are around me? What's my exact holding? How am I going to play that perfectly this one hand?
Exactly.
And that sort of thing just completely fails to build a range and protect yourself at all, and so getting back into it to adjust from the kind of like, who's weak, where can I launch an exploit, or how should I play this hand just soundly in general, to more thinking about how am I going to incorporate this into all of the hands I could get here, has been a really challenging thing to adjust to just after so long thinking about things the other way. But it's really powerful once you do start to capture it, because one of the things that's been most interesting in the adjusting phase is like, a lot of times my bluffing decisions prior to the lessons with you were kind of reaching for some sort of indicator from my opponent about whether I felt this was like a slightly above average or below average bluffing opportunity, given that we've arrived at this point in the hand, Yeah. And once you start building out your range, bluffing opportunities become much more mandatory and just obvious, I feel like, than they used to be for me. And it's just a really different mindset that almost simplifies certain parts of the game, and I can see why it's so powerful. I don't really have to care as much about you, like you said. I can be in my GTO fortress, and it's just like, deal with it. What are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And it's that feeling as well of the thing that makes this a good bluff is obviously the blockers, the showdown value, the things that are only about my own hand, as you said. So then whatever villain is thinking actually becomes kind of lunacy. Like, for villain to be sat there using the 2008 kind of thought process, he's sitting there going, this guy thinks that I'm going to do this because he thinks I think this. And really, you're just sitting there going, I have the 7 of clubs. That's a fantastic blocker to your calling range. I'm going to bet. And the guy's like leveling himself and making all these crazy adjustments based on nothing, which you can sit back and observe and then be like, oh, okay, then it's time to crush. So I think it's fantastic. Like, I think it's actually liberating now that we can solve all of this based on information that we actually have, rather than having to make weird kind of empty assumptions about how someone may or may not be thinking. Like, I used to hate that back in the day when one coach would be like, well, he probably thinks this, and another coach would be like, well, actually, he probably thinks that you think this. And I used to sit there just being like, these guys are just talking utter nonsense. And now finally, thank God, we've come to a point where we can make decisions based on things that we know, almost like poker has shifted between or from being some kind of dark, mysterious art to being an actual legitimate science that we can investigate empirically. I think it's awesome. I really like the GTO revolution.
I totally agree.
But I remember actually at the time, and we'll wrap this up in a little minute, I'll ask you about one more thing, but just real quick, I remember at the time actually thinking, this is bad, this revolution that's going on right now is nonsense, because all that actually matters is my vacuum EV. All that matters is right now the expectation of me playing this hand in this way. And I remember taking a very long time to come around to it, but now if you ask me what I think of it, I'm just like, it is essential that even 5NL players learn a bit about what GTO is and then deviate from there. So it's crazy how converted I am right now. And I guess it's just like seeing the light, seeing the truth of what's actually going on in poker. It's really cool.
Well, I would say similar, but I would caution your viewers to still keep those exploitative tricks in their bag and wield them firmly when they are sure that they're right and they're facing the weaker opposition or something.
Nah, just get a transplant in your mind so you become Pio. Like, it's fine. Don't even bother. No, I totally agree. Like, definitely. Like, I can't say enough as well about how important it is to remain exploitative. It's more of a lens, right? Like, this whole GTO revolution is not about changing the things that you do. It's about changing the lens from which you see all the options from. And then when you've done that, any exploitative option almost makes even more sense because you're viewing it from the right perspective. And I think that's what's the main thing that gets misapplied about GTO. I get students all the time saying things like, well, I don't want to adopt that because at these stakes it doesn't matter, or at these stakes it's bad. And it's like, well, if you were so rigid that you could only play GTO, you wouldn't be a good poker player. It's the lens that's important. And that's the main thing.
I can echo that to your viewers. I mean, whatever stakes you're playing now, you have aspirations to play bigger, and I can guarantee you that as you move up, based on like my own experience getting to these higher stakes like 25, 50 or something, if you don't have that shell of solid GTO play to kind of fall back on, you're going to find yourself in such difficult situations that just require that sort of analysis that you're going to go horribly wrong. And it's surprising how wrong you can go with kind of that vacuum EV approach.
Yeah.
But it's very wrong. The guys who use well-balanced GTO play against you really extract a lot of edge.
Yeah, and that's before they've even made like a large adjustment to the observed tendencies that you've got due to that vacuum kind of approach. Right. So yeah, definitely. I hope you guys are following this. Basically, vacuum thinking just means looking at the here and now factors. How do I max the EV of this one hand right here, right now? Whereas GTO is not even just about long-term EV, it's about long-term EV with all of the things that you could have been dealt instead of this one hand, and then making that defensible and not attackable from your opponent's point of view. So, right, real quick, back to you for a second then. Do you feel that your poker abilities from back in the day and just developing that web of logic, even if it turned out not to be useful in the future, do you think that just that skill, however, of being able to think analytically from poker has put you in a spot now where you can learn this stuff relatively easily, that you can get up to speed with GTO and you can actually still have success at the highest stakes with a bit of work?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I really would say that it's both a hindrance and a help. It's very hard to shake old habits. I already talked about the difficulty of just escaping vacuum EV thinking in almost all situations, but it does, anybody who's gambled for a living has to be looking at situations and saying, like, am I a favorite here or am I an underdog?
Yeah.
And you have to be stepping back and thinking critically about what you're doing and what's being done to you or whatever. And also my previous study in poker, having been a pro, poker is a lot of work, like, to get really good. And having done that before, even if, like you say, I was learning the 2008 style, which obviously became kind of obsolete, to approach the current game with that same sort of learning mentality, having done it before and knowing what it takes, a little effort outside the game, then some play, but not rushing your decisions, thinking about them seriously, then analysis outside the game where you go back through and you really try to look at each hand again as if you hadn't already played it and don't know what you did and try to think about it all critically again. Those sorts of approaches to the learning process really do make it a lot easier. And that's something, I mean, yes, I've got that framework very strong in poker learning, but to be honest, tackling that is just good for life learning and tackling other projects in general. You know, you really, as a poker player, you have to rely on yourself a little bit to put these things together. And if you can successfully do it, you'll find that you can teach yourself a lot of other things too.
Definitely. I think poker's, like, speaking personally, has taught me all kinds of self-discipline and all kinds of just ways of dealing with life and situations. And EV in poker there's life EV as well, and there's always options that lead to it, and there's always a better route to take than an alternative. And I think just that analytical kind of deciding between 3 or 4 or 5 kind of vaguely related but actually very different options, that skill is amazing. So I also think, like what you said, just one final point, although I wouldn't say it became obsolete. I guess I didn't mean to imply that, like, the whole exploitative vacuum thinking became obsolete. It could well be that guys like yourself who thrived in around 2007, 2008 from being better at vacuum exploitation than anyone else are actually quicker to see deviations from GTO and are maybe even better at implementing the more extreme deviations from GTO that do still exist out there. So I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, there could be something to that. I mean, like you mentioned, you know, you were surprised to see somebody move up in stakes or something. But from my perspective, I was having some struggles playing the 200 no limit Zoom where all my exploitative adjustments are working. I'm having a hard time, like, stepping back into the GTO shell because it's like, come on, Pete, I can just bluff this guy here. It's fine, you know?
Yeah.
So in some sense, I agree. There's a real spot still for that exploitative game. I just feel like, me personally, I've started to look at that as, like, secondary importance or something. And it depends what stakes you play. But I really think that if I had to start out getting that solid GTO foundation so that I know I'm okay in most / all situations, and then building out the exploit side, that would be my preferred method now. I feel like I'm going about that in reverse, and I have to fight the exploitative tendencies.
Yeah, it's the same with anyone. I mean, even players who learned recently, because what still exists these days are coaches that try to simplify the game and actually ignore GTO until you reach a certain level, and then you have to go through that horrible transformation again, which is so counterintuitive. Just teach them the GTO base point from the beginning, or at least when they can understand some vacuum factors, and you'll have an easier job. That's my philosophy.
Let's face it, it's not as much fun, right? You envision poker as like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to go to battle with these people, I'm going to read their souls, I'm going to play perfectly in this exact hand. And GTO doesn't care about any of that. Not really, you know?
Only if you go wrong first does it care about it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I'd love to go back and get, like, Phil Hellmuth from back in the day when he was, like, winning bracelets, and just be like, you do realize that everything you're doing is just wrong, and then just be able to, like, if I could teach Hellmuth GTO, like, that would be, like, such a life goal, you know? Like, that would be amazing. Something like that.
That's a frustrating thing to sign up for.
I don't think I'm going to, unless he pays me, like, ridiculously, I don't think I'm going to embark on that. But anyway, no disrespect to players of that generation. Like, the game was so different. Even guys like Stu.
I learned a lot from those guys, and like it was all working back then, so you can't knock it in that sense, you know. I mean, like in the NBA, they didn't used to shoot as many 3-pointers, but you could still win games with a big guy down low. Like, you know, you've got to adjust, you've got to adapt, and I would never be too critical about any previous generation, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fun fun to slate on Helmethal, let's face it, at the end of the day. But yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, it's all just relevant to the times, and who knows, maybe in 15 years from now, the game will be about who can build the best Pio, and actually engines will be legal, and they'll all be pitted against each other like Robo Wars, like we have over here, where you build a robot out of old parts and make them fight. Maybe it'll be like that, who knows.
I think you'll find me in live games then, where there's no like smartwatches or brain implants or whatever they're doing, and I'll try to just like keep the game simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. But who knows what the future holds? I think it's going to reach a point where we can't actually get any better at GTO at some point, and then what the next thing will be to give us an edge after that, who knows? It's kind of terrifying to think about. But listen,
the good thing for your viewers is that level of GTO that you're talking about there is not really attainable without the use of a computer. So, even when I'm playing in my toughest game and I know these guys are practicing their GTO, you and I have talked about it. Like, if you arrive at a situation and you're supposed to 20% this, 80% this, do you actually hit that frequency in the long run or not? Like, it's hard for a human to do still. So I wouldn't get this sense of like it's too hopeless to master this super complicated strategy. There's still limitations to how well it can be executed by a human.
There are.
So, like you're saying, if engines become legal, well, then we're all in trouble. But as long as you're not in games that tough where you're against guys using engines, there's plenty of hope for the human understanding of GTO play.
Definitely, and I mean the engines will struggle as well to like max their exploitative kind of plays and actually beat the rake. So I don't even think that as long as there are weaker players in the pool, it could be that I'm really good at GTO, the engine is even better, but the engine sucks at exploiting anyone and I'm amazing at it, so I beat the engine not directly, but by beating the weaker players more than he does. And that's something that will also keep the games alive.
Yeah.
Anyways, man, it's been great having you on and just hearing your perspective, because like I said to you before, I think you're coming from a fairly unique point of view that you've jumped back into those games. So, and it's been inspiring as well just for you to be able to adapt to it as quickly as you had, and I think that just shows that when you work really hard on poker and develop that analytical skill, you can adjust to new situations, and hopefully that might inspire others who want to get back into the game again. It might assure them that it's not totally alien, that it is actually still achievable. It's just that you've got to learn a different kind of skill set. But yeah, it's been great having you on the show. I'd love to check in with you again at some point in the future and let the audience see how you're getting on. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it, Pete. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good fun. Okay, guys, I will be back with more podcasts. I'm not going to make some pledge that I can't keep up, like I'm going to do one every week, but I am going to try and get more guests on the show, bring them to you at least once every 2 weeks or something like that. And yeah, I am still coaching, I'm still writing, I'm going to work on a third book at some point in the near future. Spoiler alert, it'll be a bit smaller, but it will be hopefully a really fascinating read. In the meantime, carrotcorner.com is my website. Grinder's Manual is there, 100 Hands is there. Those are my poker books. Check them out, and you can get in touch with me for anything at all. Podcast ideas, you want to come on the podcast, you want to talk about private coaching, whatever, admin@carrotcorner.com, and I will see you guys in the near future. Thanks so much for the support. All of you who've been sending stuff in about what happened to the podcast, please bring it back, I love it, blah blah blah. That means a lot to me, and that's motivated me to actually get up and do it again. So expect more in the near future, and thank you very much for listening. Take care, guys.